The Wednesday Bookmark on Family Radio CHRI. Each week we introduce you to something new, something that'll make you think, something that might change your life. Here's this week's author interview on The Wednesday Bookmark on Family Radio CHRI.
Joining us this week for the Wednesday Bookmark is Amanda Hope Haley. Amanda has a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies from Rhodes College and a Master of Theological Studies in Hebrew Scripture and Interpretation from Harvard University. She and her husband David live in Tennessee. We're going to talk this morning about her book, The Red-Haired Archaeologist Digs Israel. Amanda, so appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Let's begin by talking about when and how your interest in archaeology began. You say you were first exposed to archaeology in the 5th grade. Is that when you caught the bug?
That's when I was first interested in it, but I never really thought of it as a career. You think about Indiana Jones and all of the pop culture influences that are out there in the world. The way everything is presented in such a fictionalized manner, it was always fun. It was something I was interested in. And I was in a class in 5th grade, and the teacher brought in these boxes that she had put layers of different kinds of soil and sand in, and we talked about archaeology and the tools that you use, and we excavated and pulled things out, and we were exposed to it then, and we read about it. It was a great unit, but then I just kind of tucked it away in my mind and went on with the rest of my education, not thinking much about it. And then when I got to college, I went to a Presbyterian university, and I was required to take religious studies courses. And one of the classes I took was biblical archaeology, and I fell in love with every bit of it, the scripture part of it, the practical aspects of it, going out and actually digging. And then, of course, it brought back all of that stuff that had been just planted as a seed in my childhood, and everything just sort of came together. It was nice and very unexpected. I intended to be a lawyer, so I took a very different path.
That's so different.
Yes.
Oh, my word. I'm actually glad that you brought up Indiana Jones, because my guess would be, and I get the sense from the book too, that we romanticize archaeology in Western culture. How is the reality different than we imagine it to be after watching things like Indiana Jones?
Indiana Jones and a lot of those kinds of pictures, even going back to the black and white, like the Boris Karloff, the Mummy, and all of those, they're in a way they're based in history, because in the late 1800s, when archaeology really became a field, the people were going and they were doing archaeology, but they were really treasure hunting. They were going looking for particular items, and often they were looking for items that would build up their faith. And so these fictionalized stories are based in what used to be reality. But today, archaeology is much more scientific. And you start off from a scientific, premise. You maybe have a hypothesis when you go out into the field. Maybe there's something you're looking for, but it's based on facts. It's based on research and what you can see in the ground from the top down, and then you dig and you go exploring with an open mind, excited about what is going to come out of the ground and then interpreting it later, as opposed to, I have this goal if I'm going to go find the Ark of the Covenant and hopefully kill all the Nazis at the same time. That's not really a thing. Instead, it's more of an open-minded scientific exploration. And then after, once everything is out of the ground and it can be, studied, then coming to conclusions.
The lion's share of this book invites us to go along with your family as you spend 2 weeks touring around Israel. One of the early places that you talk about is Gath. I'm not sure if I'm even saying that right. Gath or Goth, Gath. Gath's most
Gath, like with a hard T.
With a hard T,
Gath.
Okay. And Gath's most famous citizen is Goliath from the Bible. Offer us some thoughts from your perspective, because I thought you had some interesting points in this respect in the book, on the Bible's David and Goliath story.
Well, the city of Gath hasn't been, it's just now really getting excavated. It's had some activity in the past. There was some disagreement over the identity of which tell was Gath, but really in the last 5 to 10 years, things are starting to come out of the ground. And what archaeologists are finding is that even though this is a Philistine city, just like Ashkelon and Ashdod and the other 5 major cities of the Philistine Pentapolis, its architecture is different. its architecture is closer to what you might find in some of the Mediterranean areas where the Philistines came from. But the main thing is it's bigger than everywhere else. Not necessarily that the rooms are bigger or the houses are bigger, but the materials they used were bigger. So whereas, you and I might use a little red brick to build our house, they were using, let's say, cinder blocks to build their houses. So the city itself, as it's coming out of the ground, looks very different from the other places. So combining that with the skeletons that are coming out of the ground, the skeletons are not giant in size. They're normal size. That does not mean that eventually they may get down and find some giant bodies. But what this is causing archaeologists and scholars to do is to go back and look at the Bible and see that when the city of Gath was being described, that maybe a lot of the reasons it was described as, or thought of as a place of larger people was, number one, because they were a warrior class. Mm-hmm. These were the Spartans of the Philistines. If you want to think it, they were strong, powerful warriors. And then also the places they lived looked very different. And so when you would walk in there, if you're used to laying little red bricks, and you see that these people have been, building pyramids or something very, very large in scale, then that's going to create an intimidation factor for the person visiting there. So that's what's coming out of the ground. And then also just the story of Goliath. In most of our English translations, the story where it says that Goliath was 9 feet tall, that is based on the Hebrew text. But the Greek text, which is more than 1,000 years older than the Hebrew, actually says that he was 7 feet. So this is a debate that goes on with between scholars as to which text is correct. The one that's 1,000 years older but happens to be in Greek and was translated, or the one that's newer but is still in Hebrew. So we go back and forth. But that number, if we end up going with the 7-foot number instead of the 9-foot number, beyond that, there is zero indication that Goliath was actually a giant. That is something that we as modern Western citizens read into the story because we've been taught from such a young age that there was David and Goliath. I mean, I remember in Sunday school, David was pictured as a child, wearing a fuzzy loincloth or something going up against this 9-foot giant and all of this armor. And the story was this little child who beats this monster, this giant, this mythical creature. And that really isn't what the story is trying to convey. David at the time would have been an adult male, strong in himself, simply from being outside all the time with the kind of work that he was doing in the pastures. Goliath, certainly trained soldier, big guy. Even if he was, quote unquote, only 7 feet tall, I mean, he was still huge. Trained warrior. So, and David comes in and he beats him by the grace of God, but it wasn't such a mystical coming together of the two. Yes. It was something that we can relate to better. God's involvement was absolutely there, but it was physically possible. It wasn't fantastic in any way.
You also talk about visiting the Dead Sea. You have some very interesting reflections on that. You go to the Sea of Galilee. We're going to skip over some of that just because I want to get to one or two more things before our time totally runs out here. But Christians think of Nazareth as being Jesus' hometown, Jesus of Nazareth, as it were. But Nazareth, and you make this point in the book, is never mentioned in what we call the Old Testament. So very few archaeological digs have even been completed there. Discuss the challenges that Nazareth presents to modern-day archaeology.
Oh, and it's a challenge you see in a lot of places in Israel, but it's particular there because in Israel, the state government is in charge of everything that comes out of the ground. And, of course, it's a Jewish nation, and so they're going to have a preference for Jewish sites. And so historically, when archaeologists have been coming in, they focus on the places that are of grand importance to the Old Testament. And also, there are a lot more of those places because, you've got 1,000+ years of Old Testament, whereas you really only have, let's say, one generation's worth of time where you would have Christian artifacts. Well, so nothing when Jesus walked the earth, after all of the Jewish wars, when a lot of the area had been destroyed by Rome, everything just sort of laid fallow. And the only way to know where Christian things happened was by the memory of the people who were there. And so nothing really happened. The sites weren't protected at all until the late 300s when St. Helena comes in and she talks to people. And every time she spoke to someone who said, this important thing happened here, she would throw a church up. And that happened everywhere. And so from that point forward, Christian tradition started to grow. And where a church would go up, community would develop around it, more building would happen. And so what happens is, as modern structures get built and maybe they fall down and new things come on top of them, the stuff that we as archaeologists want to be excavating from the first century gets buried beneath structures that are currently in use today. And so it makes archaeology challenging because now not only are you simply trying to find the stuff you're looking for and pull them out of the ground as intact as possible and learn as much as you can, but you're also having to do the engineering work of supporting everything that is in use today up above you where people are living and eating dinner with their families and doing all of those things. That's a big part of it. And then also culturally, Nazareth is it's the largest Arab city in the state of Israel, not including the West Bank, but in the state of Israel. And so it's basically split between Jews and Palestinians. And so you don't have like a big Christian contingent there, pushing and wanting to protect these sites and bringing interest to those sites. So it's a strange place because Christian pilgrims come here to see these things, but then there's a complete disconnect with the people who are living and working there today.
Great point. You visit so many other places, make so many other great points that would be super interesting to talk about. We just don't have the time to get into all of it, but I hope that we've whet people's appetite. You reflect in the book on your own personal faith and how that all ties in. Again, the book we've been talking about is The Red-Haired Archaeologist Digs Israel. Amanda Hope Haley, our guest this week for the Wednesday Bookmark. Super fascinating book. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thank you for having me.
The Wednesday Bookmark on Family Radio CHRI. To find out more about this week's bookmark or hear the author interview again or to discover previous books highlighted on the Wednesday Bookmark, visit bookmark.chri.ca.